This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever come across, and it will stay with you long after you hear it. A devoted husband and father vanishes, and as investigators dig deeper, they uncover a chilling story of betrayal, deception, and a shocking crime that no one saw coming. Some love stories captivate the world until they take a deadly turn. But what if the warning signs were there all along, hidden in plain sight? It was September 2024. Life in Cottonwood Heights, Utah moved as it always did. Families went about their routines, neighbors exchanged greetings, and nothing seemed out of place. But inside one home, a moment of unbearable violence had already unfolded. A husband was missing, and in the days that followed, the truth would surface. A truth so chilling that it would send shockwaves through the entire community. Cottonwood Heights is the kind of place where people feel safe, where crimes are few and far between. But that safety shattered when 51-year-old Matthew Johnson, a decorated member of the Utah National Guard's Special Operations Unit, was reported missing. His wife, Jennifer Gledhill, claimed she had no idea where he was. She told police that Matthew had simply disappeared, leaving his truck behind in an unfamiliar location. But as the days passed, her version of events started to crumble. Jennifer's demeanor raised questions. She wasn't frantic, she wasn't pleading for help to find her husband. And then there was something else, something that turned suspicion into certainty. A confession, but not the kind you'd expect. One phone call, a moment of weakness, and Jennifer revealed everything. This is the horrifying case of Jennifer Gledhill. Jennifer Gledhill wasn't just another name in the headlines. She was a mother, a friend, and a woman who had spent years trying to build the kind of life she had always dreamed of. At 42, she was known throughout Cottonwood Heights as someone you could count on. A warm, dependable presence who put her children above everything else. With 3 kids, ages 5, 7, and 11, her days were filled with school drop-offs, packed lunches, bedtime stories, and the kind of everyday chaos that only a mother could manage. But through it all, Jennifer carried herself with grace. She had a quiet strength about her, a resilience that made people admire her even if they didn't know the full extent of the battles she was fighting behind closed doors. Her marriage to Matthew had once seemed promising. To outsiders, they were a family like any other. Busy, devoted parents trying to juggle careers and kids while keeping their relationship intact. But behind the smiles and family photos and the carefully curated holiday greetings, things had been unraveling for years. Jennifer had confided in close friends about the growing tension in her home, the way arguments had escalated, how she had felt trapped. There were things she hadn't said out loud, things that made her uneasy, that left her questioning her own reality. But she knew one thing for certain: she could no longer stay. That summer, Jennifer made the difficult decision to file for divorce. It wasn't a choice she had come to lightly. Divorce meant upheaval, uncertainty, a future she hadn't planned for. But for the sake of her children and her own well-being, she was ready to fight for a new beginning. What followed was a bitter custody battle that only seemed to intensify the strain between her and Matthew. She alleged abuse, seeking a protective order to keep herself and the children safe. For a while, it seemed like she had taken control of her future, that she had drawn a line Matthew couldn't cross. But then, on September 16, everything changed. A judge reviewed the evidence and ruled against a permanent protective order, stating there wasn't enough proof of abuse. It was a devastating blow. Jennifer had hoped this legal barrier would give her the security she desperately needed, but instead it gave Matthew something else: hope. The ruling meant that the door hadn't been shut completely, that there was still a chance he could regain access to his children, and for Matthew that meant there was still unfinished business. Jennifer, however, had already made up her mind. She was moving forward, with or without the court's help. There was no reconciliation to be had, no scenario where she would let Matthew back into her life. She was determined to protect her children, even if it meant fighting an uphill battle. What she didn't know was that she was running out of time. The days that followed were filled with quiet tension, the kind that lingers in the air, waiting to break. Jennifer tried to go about her routine as normally as possible, but something had shifted. Whether she sensed the danger or had pushed it to the back of her mind, no one could say for sure. But soon, the life she had fought so hard to reclaim would be shattered in a way no one saw coming. Jennifer had made her choice. She was moving on. The protective order had been denied, but that didn't mean she was going to let Matthew control her any longer. She had started seeing someone else while they were still married, a relationship that had begun as an escape from the suffocating reality of her marriage and had grown into something more. To some, it was a betrayal. To Jennifer, It was a sign that she was finally taking back her life. But for Matthew, it was the ultimate insult. It was one thing for her to leave, it was another for her to replace him before their marriage had even legally ended. The affair had been another point of contention in their already volatile relationship. It was ammunition for Matthew in their custody battle, proof in his mind that she was reckless and undeserving of full custody of their children. But for Jennifer, it was more complicated than that. It wasn't about infidelity, it was about survival. She had spent years in a marriage that had drained her, that had left her feeling like a shadow of herself. She wanted to feel alive again, she wanted to feel wanted, and for the first time in years, she did. But freedom comes at a price, and on the night of September 20, the weight of every bad decision, every argument, every moment of resentment came crashing down in a way no one could have predicted. No one knows exactly how the night began. Maybe Jennifer and Matthew had exchanged a few words when she dropped the kids off. Maybe he had sensed something different in her, something more final. Or maybe the tension had been building for weeks, a slow-burning fire waiting for the right moment to ignite. What is known is that by the time night fell, the air between them had turned electric, with anger, betrayal, and something far more dangerous, desperate. Prosecutors would later piece together what they believed happened in the hours that followed. Jennifer and Matthew had argued about the affair, about the custody battle, about the years of resentment that had finally reached their breaking point. Words had turned to accusations, and accusations had turned to something much darker. At some point, Matthew had gone to bed, his guard lowered, exhausted from a battle he thought would continue another day. But Jennifer had made up her mind. This fight wasn't going to drag on any longer. As Matthew lay asleep, Jennifer picked up a gun. Whether she hesitated, whether she second-guessed herself in those final moments, no one knows. But what is certain is that in the silence of the night, a single gunshot rang out, tearing through the darkness and through Matthew's skull. The man who had once been a soldier, a protector, a father, never even had a chance to defend himself. The weight of what had just happened must have been immediate. The smell of gunpowder in the air, the deafening silence that followed, the realization that there was no undoing what she had just done. In that moment, Jennifer was no longer just a woman fighting for her freedom. She had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. What happened in the minutes after the gunshot remains a mystery. Did she sit in silence, staring at what she had done? Did she panic? Did she try to convince herself that she had no other choice? Whatever ran through her mind in those moments, one thing was certain. She would now have to face the consequences of what she had done. But this wasn't over, not yet. Because as the hours ticked by and the reality of her actions settled in, Jennifer wasn't just thinking about what had happened. She was thinking about what came next. And in the days that followed, she would make decisions that would take this case from a tragic crime of passion to something far more calculated, something far more chilling. Jennifer had crossed the line from desperation to something far more calculated. The moment Matthew took his last breath, the weight of what she had done settled in, but instead of breaking down or turning herself in, she chose a different path, one that required precision, deception, and an unsettling level of composure.
If you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe button and be part of the conversation where we dig deep into the most shocking and mysterious cases together.
There was no time to hesitate. Every second that passed was another chance for someone to hear the gunshot, to come knocking, to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. She moved quickly, her mind racing through every possible scenario. She couldn't just leave him there. That would lead straight back to her. The evidence was everywhere, on the mattress, on the walls, on her hands. Every trace of what had happened had to disappear. The cleanup was meticulous. She stripped the bed, removing the blood-soaked sheets before turning her attention to the mattress itself. It was too damaged, too obvious. Keeping it would be a mistake, so she dragged it out, disposing of it before anyone could notice it missing. Then she turned her focus to Matthew. His body was dead weight, unmoving, heavy, and undeniable proof of what she had done. She needed to make him vanish, at least for now. A storage container. That was the answer. She found one large enough to hold his body and forced him inside, sealing away the crime she had committed. But she didn't stop there. She knew Matthew's truck sitting outside their home would raise questions. If anyone came looking for him, the last place they should think to check was with her. So she moved it, parking it somewhere else, planting the idea that maybe, just maybe, Matthew had left on his own. It was a risk, but she was willing to take it. And then she waited. Days passed. Life moved forward, and Jennifer carried on as if nothing had happened. She smiled at neighbors, dropped her kids off at school, and went through the motions of a woman who had not just committed the unthinkable. Every time she looked in the mirror, she was staring at a murderer. But to the outside world, she was just Jennifer, the mother, the ex-wife, the woman who had fought so hard for her freedom. But behind closed doors, the weight of her decision loomed. The storage container sat like a ticking time bomb, a secret that couldn't stay buried forever. The smell. The evidence. It was only a matter of time before someone asked the wrong question, before someone noticed Matthew was missing for too long. 8 days. That's how long she waited. On September 28, Jennifer finally took the next step in her plan. She walked into the police station and reported Matthew missing. She told them she hadn't seen him in days, that he had disappeared without a trace. Maybe she thought she had played her cards right, that she had covered her tracks well enough to make it believable. But from the moment she spoke, there was something off. Something that didn't sit right with investigators. Matthew was not the type of man to just disappear. He was a father, a soldier, a man with responsibilities. His sudden absence made no sense, and Jennifer, she was too calm, too rehearsed. Something about her didn't add up. The walls were closing in, but she didn't see it yet. Investigators were already suspicious, already poking holes in her story, and soon the cracks in her carefully constructed lie would begin to show. Jennifer had always been composed, always in control. But as investigators pressed forward, that control began to slip. Her carefully crafted story was unraveling, and the people around her were beginning to see the inconsistencies. It started with small details, things that wouldn't have mattered if she hadn't been lying. She told police Matthew left without a word, but his phone, wallet, and keys were still inside the house. His truck was found abandoned, but there was no logical reason for him to leave it there. And then there was her behavior. Far from the grief-stricken wife, Jennifer seemed detached, almost rehearsed. But it wasn't just the police who noticed. The people closest to her were starting to ask questions, including the man she had been seeing in secret, the man she confided in, the man who would ultimately seal her fate. He had never been entirely comfortable with the situation. Their affair had been thrilling, but there were moments when Jennifer said things that left him unsettled. She spoke of Matthew with a casual coldness that made him uneasy. He brushed it off at first. People vent when they're unhappy in their marriages. But then she said something he couldn't ignore. She told him Matthew was dead, and she was the one who killed him. At first he thought she was joking. The way she said it was so matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing a minor inconvenience rather than the murder of her husband. But then she looked him in the eye and referenced the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, saying, "I'm like off with their heads." It was a bizarre, unsettling moment, one that made his stomach turn. Still, he clung to the possibility that she was being dramatic, exaggerating for effect. But when he pressed her for details, her expression changed. Her confidence wavered. And for the first time, she seemed afraid. "Don't think of me as a monster," she pleaded. "Remember who I was before I opened my mouth." That was the moment he knew. This wasn't a dark joke. This wasn't a desperate cry for attention. Jennifer had killed her husband. He couldn't shake the weight of that knowledge. It clung to him, suffocating, making every interaction with her unbearable. She was capable of murder. He knew that now. And if she had done it once, what was stopping her from doing it again? The fear gnawed at him until he couldn't stay silent any longer. He walked into the police station, sat down with investigators, and told them everything. That confession changed the entire course of the investigation. With a witness willing to come forward and a direct admission of guilt, detectives had what they needed to act. They obtained a search warrant for Jennifer's home, and what they found only confirmed what they already suspect. The bedroom told a story of violence. Beneath the bed, bloodstains seeped into the carpet, stark against the fibers. The bed frame held traces of blood, tiny droplets that had been missed in a hasty attempt to clean. The walls smelled of bleach, the kind of sterile chemical scent that meant someone had been desperate to erase something. In the garage, a brand new mattress sat where the old one should have been. That more than anything sealed it. No one replaces a mattress overnight unless they have something to hide. Jennifer hadn't just killed Matthew, she had tried to scrub away every trace of him. But no matter how hard she tried, there were things she couldn't erase. The weight of her words, the blood that soaked into the fibers of her home, the look in her lover's eyes when he realized what she had done. And now the truth was out. Investigators weren't just looking for a missing man anymore. They were searching for a body. The search for Matthew Johnson's body stretched on for weeks, then months. Authorities scoured the mountains, the deserts, the rivers, anywhere Jennifer could have hidden him. They brought in cadaver dogs, searched through Jennifer's digital footprint, and analyzed her movements in the days following Matthew's disappearance. But no matter how hard they looked, there was nothing, no body, no remains. Just a growing sense of unease that Jennifer had been meticulous in covering her tracks. Without a body, prosecutors knew their case would be difficult. Juries are often hesitant to convict without physical proof of a murder, but this case was different. There was no reasonable alternative explanation for Matthew's disappearance. The blood evidence in the bedroom, the missing mattress, Jennifer's confession to her lover, it all pointed in one direction, and prosecutors were determined to make sure she didn't escape justice. On October 2, 2024, authorities moved in. Jennifer Gledhill was arrested at her home, still maintaining the same icy composure she had when she first reported Matthew missing. But her confidence wavered when she heard the charges: first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and abuse or desecration of a human body. As the reality of what was happening set in, Jennifer's demeanor began to crack. She protested, insisting she was being framed. She claimed Matthew had left of his own free will and that the police were twisting the evidence. But the facts spoke louder than her words. Her detention hearing on February 28, 2025 was a defining moment in the case. Prosecutors played a recorded phone call between Jennifer and her lover, the same man who had turned her in. On the call, Jennifer tried to explain away her actions, spinning new versions of the truth with each sentence. But the damage was done. The judge listened, taking in every word, every pause, every desperate attempt to manipulate. And when the recording ended, his decision was swift. Jennifer was a danger to society. Bail was denied. As Jennifer was led back to her cell, the weight of her situation settled on her. She had gone from the mastermind of a deadly plan to an inmate awaiting trial. The power she once wielded, the control she fought to maintain, was slipping through her fingers. But she wasn't ready to give up. Jennifer pleaded not guilty. She refused to admit what she had done, clinging to the hope that without a body she could still walk free. Her legal team prepared for battle, determined to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They would argue that Matthew could still be alive, that the blood in the bedroom wasn't enough to prove murder, that Jennifer's words to her lover were taken out of context. But prosecutors weren't going to let her manipulate the truth any longer. The trial date was set December 8, 2025. It would last until December 17th, and in those 9 days, Matthew's family and friends would relive their worst nightmare. The prosecution would lay out every chilling detail, from the night Matthew was last seen to Jennifer's attempts to erase his existence. They would expose the deception, the betrayal, and the cold-blooded nature of the crime, and they would fight to ensure that Jennifer never walked free again. The one thing that remained a mystery, the one piece of the puzzle that haunted everyone involved, was Matthew's body. Where had Jennifer hidden him? Was he buried in a remote canyon, disposed of in a way that made recovery impossible? Only Jennifer knew the answer, but as the trial loomed, one thing was certain: justice was coming. And when the jury reached their verdict, the world would finally see Jennifer Gledhill for what she truly was. If you believe justice should always be served, subscribe to the channel. Only those who think killers should walk free won't subscribe.